Buonasera a tutti, grazie per essere presenti alla presentazione di questo progetto che Dan Graham ha ideato per la Fondazione Zegna di Trivero. Naturalmente un grazie particolare all'artista stesso, Dan, e a Joseph Grima che ha accettato il ruolo di moderare questo nostro incontro. Io vorrei introdurre brevemente quello che è la Fondazione Zegna e quello che è il progetto di arte pubblica all'aperto. Nostro nonno Ermenegildo con il suo esempio ci ha insegnato che bisogna prendersi cura non soltanto della qualità dei tessuti che escono dalla fabbrica, ma anche della qualità di vita della comunità che ruota intorno all'anificio. Per questo motivo gli ha costruito intorno agli anni 30 tutta una serie di edifici assistenziali e ricreativi, quali ad esempio una piscina, una palestra, una maternità, il cinematografo, la biblioteca, lo studio del dottore dentistico e l'ambulatorio, oltre ad aver fatto tutta una serie di opere sul paesaggio, tra cui la costruzione della panoramica Zegna, che è una strada di 14 km che dal paese di Trivero collega la località turistica di Bielmonte, e oltre a questo aver riforestato praticamente tutte le pendici del Monte Rubello che erano una volta dedicate ai pascoli, da qui anche il motivo della presenza dell'anificio in questo paesaggio prealpino, con circa 500.000 tra conifere, rododendri e ortensie. Noi figli, suoi eredi, abbiamo capito questo amore che lui aveva per il paesaggio, abbiamo voluto portarlo avanti creando nel 1993 l'Oasi Zegna, che è un territorio protetto di quasi 100 km quadrati in cui l'uomo vive in armonia con l'ambiente e i suoi ecosistemi. Nel 2000 la quarta generazione della famiglia ha deciso di creare una fondazione che ha l'obiettivo di migliorare la vita dell'individuo e delle comunità locali e internazionali. Gli ambiti di intervento della Fondazione sono principalmente 4: la salvaguardia e la valorizzazione del patrimonio ambientale e culturale, il sostegno per lo sviluppo sostenibile delle comunità locali in Italia e nel mondo, il supporto alla ricerca medica e scientifica, la promozione di iniziative di educazione, istruzione e formazione dei giovani. Nel 2006, Barbara Casavecchi ed io abbiamo pensato di proporre alla Fondazione un progetto che portasse il linguaggio dell'arte contemporanea all'interno di questo territorio, perché ci sembrava che ai giorni nostri fosse il modo migliore per interpretare quello che era il pensiero del nonno, che era proprio di migliorare la qualità della vita delle persone. E quindi ci siamo impegnati con una scadenza praticamente annuale dal 2008 a portare degli artisti di calibro internazionale a confrontarsi con il nostro territorio, studiando a 4 mani, o meglio a 6 mani, ogni anno dei progetti specifici che ci sono permanenti e quindi sono visitabili in qualunque momento e tra l'altro sono, come lo spiega il titolo, all'aperto. Abbiamo iniziato nel 2008 con l'intervento di Daniel Buren sulle terrazze dell'anificio Zegna. Siamo voluti partire di lì perché ci sembrava il centro propulsore da cui è poi partita un po' l'attività di tutto il villaggio. E Daniel Buren ha appunto segnato il perimetro di questa grande architettura un po' severa con un'installazione di 130 bandiere colorate che segnano anche il passaggio delle stagioni. L'anno successivo, nel 2009, abbiamo invece lavorato con Alberto Garutti, un artista che è professore anche all'Accademia di Belle Arti di Brera, che ha fatto una mappatura del territorio attraverso l'avvicinamento alle famiglie proprietarie di alcuni cani. Naturalmente queste famiglie le ha conosciute attraverso i bambini delle scuole elementari a cui ha chiesto di scrivere un tema sul loro cane preferito. Naturalmente questo gli ha consentito di conoscere il cane, il proprietario del cane, entrare in contatto con loro e poter fare un ritratto a grandezza naturale di questi cani che sono diventati i protagonisti di queste panchine in cemento che sono disperse in tutto il comune di Trivero, che è un comune molto frammentato perché è formato da circa 30 frazioni, quindi non c'è il classico nucleo storico importante con delle architetture con cui bisogna confrontarsi. L'anno successivo abbiamo saltato poi l'edizione del 2010 perché tutti gli sforzi del gruppo e della Fondazione erano concentrati sulla mostra che abbiamo avuto qui in Triennale, con cui abbiamo celebrato il centenario dell'azienda. Quindi siamo passati nel 2011 a lavorare con Stefano Arienti, artista che molti di voi conosceranno perché è milanese, che ha pensato di fornire molte parti del paese di Trivero e delle sue frazioni del segnale wifi, che è gratuito per 90 minuti a disposizione di tutti, ma oltre ad aver fornito questo servizio ha voluto materializzarlo attraverso questi grandi pietroni che lui ha trovato nelle cave locali e nei depositi locali, su cui ha scolpito con l'aiuto di uno scalpellino le facce che lui stesso aveva disegnato o che aveva ripreso dai disegni fatti sempre con i bambini delle scuole. Quindi c'è questa immaterialità del segnale internet legata a questa pesantezza di questi pietroni che sembrano quasi degli io li chiamo ancestors, degli antenati che sono lì da sempre. Poi è stata la volta di Roman Signer nel 2012, artista di St. Gallen, del cantone di St. Gallen in Svizzera, che ha installato all'ingresso del nostro anificio un orologio che ha il tipico quadrante degli orologi delle ferrovie svizzere, che però non ha le lancette, quindi non dà la possibilità di vedere il tempo, ma che semplicemente getta un buffo di vapore ogni 15 minuti e tra l'altro è azionato dallo stesso vapore che fa funzionare alcuni dei macchinari all'interno dell'anificio. Quindi a lui piaceva molto creare questa relazione tra l'attività lavorativa della fabbrica. Lui stesso, prima di essere artista, era stato un operaio all'interno di una fabbrica di pentole a pressione, e l'idea il concetto del tempo, che però come vi dico non viene assolutamente precisato. L'anno scorso, e poi arriviamo ad Angrama, è stata la volta di Marcello Malloberti, che noi abbiamo conosciuto soprattutto per le sue performances, e quindi abbiamo pensato che la sua facilità di entrare in contatto con il pubblico lo potesse aiutare a entrare in contatto con i triveresi, per cui abbiamo fatto praticamente un censimento di tutte le associazioni che ci sono all'interno del paese, che sono tantissime. Lui ha conosciuto quelli che erano i rappresentanti, ha scelto quelle che erano più console alle sue caratteristiche, al suo modo di lavorare, e con alcune di queste ha portato avanti un lavoro che è stato prima sollecitare da loro uno spazio che loro avrebbero voluto vedere rivitalizzato. E si tratta in questo caso delle terrazze piano di quello che è il centro Zegna, in cui sono tutti quei servizi che vi ho menzionato all'inizio, creati dal nonno. Questi qui erano dei campi di bocce che erano in disuso da 25 anni, e lui appunto ha voluto riattivare questo spazio trasformandolo da una parte in un giardino di rose bianche e dall'altra in uno spazio lasciato totalmente a disposizione di quelle che possono essere le feste dei triveresi, segnando idealmente la posizione di un palco che è identificato da quelle lampadine colorate che rimangono accese, e poi utilizzando un'asta parafulmini che si trova nelle immediate vicinanze come supporto per una luna al neon, e quindi ha creato questo segno poetico. Naturalmente una parte importantissima del progetto è stata la performance che lui ha organizzato in occasione dell'apertura, in cui tutte queste persone, non solo quelle che hanno partecipato al progetto, ma tutte le altre rappresentanti dell'associazione hanno partecipato, e devo dire che è stata un'inaugurazione che ci ha dato grandissima soddisfazione, perché è stata molto seguita e molto apprezzata dai triveresi, e adesso hanno questo spazio completamente a disposizione, che naturalmente è più per i mesi primaverili estivi, perché trattandosi di un giardino, questo è quanto. E così arriviamo nel 2014 al progetto di Dangram, che se vogliamo è il primo lavoro che si colloca non nel nel villaggio di Trivero vero e proprio, ma in quello che è uno dei luoghi più incredibili della panoramica Zegna e dell'oasi Zegna, ma di questo lascio Barbara parlare. Grazie.
Grazie mille ad Andrea. A mia volta ne approfitto per ringraziare certo la Fondazione, Dan, e anche sua moglie Mieko, che ci ha raggiunto questo giorno. Vi parlerò molto rapidamente di quello che è il progetto di Dan Graham, perché poi illustrerà molto meglio di me tutto il suo lavoro in occasione di questa lecture. Sono anche felice che Dan sia venuto, perché spesso ha parlato del lavoro di Gio Colombo, un progetto per la Triennale di Milano del 54. Gio Colombo è uno dei suoi eroi milanesi, insieme a Terragni, di cui siamo andati oggi a vedere Casa Rustici, quindi credo che sia anche un luogo un po' speciale nel suo caso. Il progetto che vedremo e che vi invito tutti a vedere, che inaugura questo sabato a Trivero, vicino a Biella, nel pomeriggio alle 2:30, si chiama Two-Way Mirror Hedge Arabesque. È un padiglione, si trova all'interno di questo spazio molto bello che è la conca dei rododendri. La conca ha una storia molto semplice, era una zona montana nell'arco della riforestazione della zona. È stato chiamato a pensare quel luogo un grande architetto di paesaggio italiano, fiorentino, Pietro Porcinai, che ci ha lavorato dal 59 al 79. Poi i rododendri sono cresciuti, le azalee, tutto ha proseguito serenamente, fino a che qualche anno fa è stato chiamato un altro importante architetto di paesaggio italiano, che è Paolo Peirone, a riallestire una parte dei tragitti, dei percorsi, a ordinare tutta l'area ed è ritornato a farlo anche in questa occasione per meglio accogliere il padiglione di Dan. Ci sembrava interessante avere il lavoro di Dan all'interno di quel contesto perché fin dai primi anni '80 la ragione per la quale anche i suoi primi padiglioni hanno preso forma è stato a partire da una riflessione su quelli che erano i giardini storici, su quella che era l'architettura di paesaggio, spesso fa riferimento al gazebo piuttosto che alla gloriette o glorieta, o insomma a seconda delle tipologie architettoniche, ma comunque la logica del padiglione che si inserisce all'interno dello spazio verde, ma anche di uno spazio disegnato e costruito, e soprattutto perché, come ci piacerebbe che fosse per buona parte dei progetti di all'aperto, è un lavoro accessibile. Poi Dan ce lo racconterà assolutamente meglio, ma quando dice che insomma, una delle funzioni dei suoi padiglioni è che le persone ci si possano fare le foto e i bambini ci possano giocare dentro, racconta in realtà una capacità di relazione immediata con quello che è il suo lavoro e che ha ovviamente un ampio sostrato di riflessioni filosofiche, psicanalitiche legate all'architettura e moltissimi altri linguaggi molto ricchi, ma che poi nell'esperienza delle persone, se a qualcuno è capitato di entrare in uno dei padiglioni di Dan, si ritorna tutti un po' bambini a tratti, perché ci si specchia, ci si guarda fuori dentro. Il titolo è semplice, Two-Way Mirror è il tipo di vetro che Dan utilizza spessissimo, è un vetro che in italiano si chiama rifrazione differenziata, se non sbaglio. Ha la caratteristica di essere sia trasparente sia di riflettere e quindi moltiplica gli effetti di autoriflessione, ma anche riflette tutto quello che gli sta alle spalle e attorno. Hedge, perché è attraversato da una siepe, come spesso succede poi nei casi dei padiglioni, e Arabesque perché la forma che hanno questi padiglioni non è rettangolare, lineare, minimalista, ma insomma, in questo caso ha un profilo più morbido. E qui lo vedete con la nostra prima grande preview che è successa con i ragazzi delle scuole ed è stato un momento di grande, non so, per me divertimento. E quindi ora cedo volentierissimo la parola a Dan e ovviamente anche a Joseph che è invitato a dialogare con lui.
First, I have to say I'm very happy to be doing things with Foundation Zegna. They've had some very important artists, senior artists. Roman Singer must be 10 years older than me, and he's one of the greatest living artists and a friend of mine. Daniel Buren used to be a friend of mine. He's also much older, so you support senior artists. But my work, maybe when you're old, you do a lot of work for children. I have no children, I have no grandchildren, but children love my work. Usually when I do a piece, to convince people to do the piece, I say my work is for it's a funhouse situation for children and a photo opportunity for parents. Do you want to say something, or just go on to the lecture? I'm going to do a lecture about all the works I've done with two-way mirror glass that combine two-way mirror glass with landscape aspects. I have to say, before we do the first image of two adjacent pavilions, something really changed in Europe with the first documenta. The first documenta in Kassel was organized because Kassel was cut off from the rest of Germany by the Berlin Wall. So the idea was to reconstruct the city and bring tourists there. There was a time when art was placed in a kind of park landscape setting, in relation usually to a castle. I call it Schlosskunst. The buildings, the buildings of Documenta were actually placed in a park which had a small river, the Fulda River, which I used in my first work. It also had landscape aspects. There's a very high palisade that people could see the city from. And when I did my first work, which I think will screen right now, when I did my first week, two adjacent pavilions in '78, which is conceived as a model in '78, but shown in '81. We can put it on right now, and I'll describe it. I'm using the material two-way mirror glass. We can continue.
Investigated the role of the park, the suburbs.
It's two cubes. Two pavilions you can go inside. They're 2.3 meters on all sides, including the height. They're both two-way mirror glass. Two-way mirror glass is used as one-way mirror glass in corporate buildings, but I use it so it's lit inside and outside, so it becomes transparent and reflective. But one of the pavilions, the top of one of the pavilions is opaque. So on the inside, if you're inside the pavilion, it's dark inside, but you can see outside without being seen. But people on the outside just see a mirror image of themselves. The other pavilion has transparent roof, so it keeps changing as the light changes. It's both transparent and reflective simultaneously, but it keeps shifting as the light changes. So that relates my work to landscape. When I first saw the piece, I was up early in the morning and people were walking their dogs early in the morning, and I heard a police siren. Apparently somebody had gone inside and the dog couldn't find them because there was a mirror reflection outside. You can see people lying down outside, because I want my piece to be a little like impressionist situation where people lie down in the grass. The interior, by the way, people can lie down inside on sleeping bags. In fact, young students did that when it was in Documenta. But here you can see me as I've seen from outside. But you can see as part reflective and part transparent. You can also see the landscape aspect. I think a two-way mirror glass was first used as one-way mirror during the Jimmy Carter period, because Jimmy Carter said corporations were destroying the environment. So the use of one-way mirror meant when buildings were clad in one-way mirror, they were reflective on the outside, which means it cut down air conditioning costs in hot climates. But it was also surveillance, because on the inside you could see outside without being being seen. Okay, stop. Cut that off. But I think it's also an alibi for corporations, because the one-way mirror glass mirror characteristics reflect the sky, and the corporation seems to be the sky, or the environment. What I do actually is a little bit the idea of Foucault, who believed in heterotopia. I've made a heterotopia pleasure situation out of alienating one-way mirror glass. Now we'll have the first image. Next. Oh no, this is just an image of itself during winter conditions. It was actually bought by Croydon Mueller, which is a sculpture park. It's displayed next to a de Trivero, so it does have aspects of being in a sculpture park. And then we'll have the next image. Next image, please. This is something very interesting. This is a piece in Clisson, in Brittany. The French socialist government under Jacques Lang had the idea that the art should get away from the center of the city, center of Pompidou, and be regionalized. So art in the 1980s in France were all in these kind of overlays of historical gardens, and this garden was called Clisson. It was actually built by a painter who was a follower of Poussin, but moved back to France after the Revolution, and he bought land very cheaply. So what he put in his park, it's kind of a theme park, he put all, from Poussin paintings, he put all these Greek temples, and it was basically a theme park for Poussin paintings. It's surrounded by water, and I wanted to do a piece that would be a bridge going across the water, but that was too expensive. So what I did actually was a simple piece, triangle, a la Eldo Rossi. One side was two mirror glass, and the other side was a pergola with lines. And then I made a little canal, and you could walk actually on a steel grid, walking over the water. Next slide. This is how it was used. Unfortunately, it was taken down when the socialist government fell, although they reconstructed it. And they also had a wonderful non-June pike there. It was pretty, but it was in Brittany. In fact, all these parks were in Brittany. I also was very involved with Parc La Villette before it was Parc La Villette. It was actually a park that had a science museum and an Almanac Cinema, which was which had a kind of a mirror dome. And my idea there. It was the idea of Francois Clouard that the socialist government should make work on the edge of the city. So the original idea for Parc La Villette actually was to be an antidote. It was to make a park that would be for science, for education for children, and also entertainment. I think it was an antidote, and of course it was on the edge of the city. So it was for working class people, both in the edge of the city, inside and outside. I think it was an antidote to Centre Pompidou, which, by the way, was Chirac's. Chirac was dedicated to the right government, and also an antidote to Euro Disney. And it could be seen, by the way, on highways, at the edge of the city. And in other words, it was very like Venturi. The idea that you could see it as a billboard in the edge of the city. I actually constructed a fantasy situation before it was Parc La Villette. There was an earth mound, a large earth hill with grass, and the idea was that boys could become king of the mountain. What I did for Children's Pavilion, which was never realized, was I made an earth mound where children could go up on the top. There was a kind of a two-way mirror oculus, which was concave on the top, so children could see themselves as supermen, as giants. Whereas inside, there were images of children from different nations, large zebra chromes by Jeff Wall. Also, there was a reflecting pond, and you could look up at the convex two-way mirror, and people were very small, but the gazes of the children on top and the gazes of the parents inside would meet. So it's all about the gaze. In fact, all my work using two-way mirror is about the gaze. When I was 14, I read Jean-Paul Sartre's Being in Nothingness, and he talked about the mirror stage beginning when small children saw themselves as they gazed at other people, and the people would gaze back at them. So all my work, unlike minimal art, is really about the spectator's gaze and the spectators seeing each other being seen. I realize my work is very much like Georges Seurat in many ways. Yes, I never understood Impressionism, but slowly I'm realizing my work is kind of about Impressionism in a certain way, but very optical. Also, when I was 13, I made a telescope, as many boys would do. And of course, I think my work is really boys' work. It's a little bit voyeuristic, which was difficult for me as a feminist, but also it's really from a boy's point of view. Next slide. And on a slide, the next video. This was a piece I did for the sculptures exhibition in Munster. Sculpture. This was every 2 years. Casper Koenig and a collaborator would place sculpture in a park situation. Again, it's a castle situation. There was a big Baroque palace in the center of the city. It's a university city, and there was a park divided. The octagon, the palace was octagonal, and the park was divided by boundaries with trees into 8 different sections. And in the center of each of these alleys was placed things, buildings like gazebos. They were all taken down, so I did a piece that's like a gazebo. It's octagonal, relating to the palace. It's the top is wood, relating to Aldo Rossi. It has it looks like an Aldo Rossi, and children on the inside. We can have next slide. Children on the inside had a funhouse kaleidoscopic situation, but parents on the outside would take photographs of them. There's a pole in the side, little like Brancusi's world pole holding up the world, and children absolutely loved it because it would rotate around the pole. Of course, in nightclubs, girls sometimes, strippers sometimes rotate around the pole. Next work. This is another interesting piece I did called Tuemir Hedge Labyrinth. It was designed for International Garden Year in Stuttgart in '89. Every 2 years, a park in a city in Germany wants to reconfigures their parks in the center, and there's a show called a garden show called a garden show where you can buy seeds, flowers, and lawnmowers, power lawnmowers. They also wanted artists to do things that were meeting points. So I did 2 things: skateboard pavilion, because I thought there was nothing for teenagers. It was to be, you had a graffiti on it, and it was actually not realized. I still have a model of it. And this other piece, Tuemir Hedge Labyrinth. In the center of Stuttgart were all these new office buildings, which were Tuemir, and I used hedges because the hedges were both were historically important in European architecture, landscape architecture, both from the English garden, and also to maybe go back to the Baroque garden. But here I used it depicting the edge of the city. The edge of the city, people have suburban houses, and they always have hedges dividing the private area with the outside area. So I'm defining the city. All my work has to do with city plan. I'm defining the city and city park by showing the center of the city and the edge of the city. And I have to say, when I had a gallery, I showed Saul LeWitt. Saul LeWitt's work was about the city plan. He was an architect. He studied architecture, and he loved De Chirico. He said De Chirico showed on his paintings the city plan of Torino. So from that on, all my work from Homes for America until now really has to do with the city plan. But of course, when I went to Europe, I was working in Europe, so I did a historical research on landscape parks. I had a thesis. I did an article called Museum is Garden, Gardens Museum, because I thought the first museums were actually Renaissance gardens. That they were archaeological digs. They had water features, like sprouting water. They were poetic and political allegories. And of course, I got very involved in pavilions through Barcelona Pavilion. Barcelona Pavilion, it was landscaped. It had hedges outside. And I think it's an allegory for the Weimar Republic. The hedges would be reflected on the dark, almost green-like glass. There was a water reflected pond inside, and also it reflected on the green marble. As people walked around it, it was a narrative situation. A narrative situation. I think all of Mises' work in Europe was landscape. Nut House is all landscape, but of course in the Barcelona Pavilion reconstruction they didn't have the landscaping. I also realized pavilions are very important in cities. They're used for bus shelters or telephone booths, which probably don't exist anymore. So my work is always urbanistic, and the park was pretty important. And now the next video, the piece was finally realized with a collector in La Jolla. So we'll just turn on the next video. Forget about the music. The woman who did my videotaping, that was her boyfriend's music. I couldn't get rid of it. But what I did here with the piece in La Jolla is it continues the hedges. In other words, it's continuing the line of the hedges. We can turn it up now, the sound.
And inside this redefined park area. Things. The idea of International Garden Year was to have meeting points which would have artworks. So I designed two-way mirror labyrinth near a bridge as a kind of meeting point. Hedges are very important to me. They relate to modern suburban settings where the hedges define property lines, public and private, boundary lines with Baroque labyrinth gardens and English garden, Baroque gardens.
This is in La Jolla, near the Mexican border, so this is a Mexican gardener trying to start the power mower.
Because the city is like a labyrinth, right-angle labyrinth. And using
yes, the collector was rich,
with the hedges
as many collectors are.
A kind of virtual space. The hedges should be semi-opaque, so from a distance you can't see.
What I like about hedges is from a distance they're opaque, but when you get in close, they're transparent. And that relates to the two-way mirror glass, which is both transparent and reflective and simultaneously changing.
Virtual reality.
In all my work, you have to walk for it to work. It's about time. Unlike minimal art, which had nothing to do with time. Yes, I got very involved with time-based work because I listened to Steve Reich, Lamont Young, and I did use a lot of marijuana. And just a one-time hashish. Just once. Somebody put TCP in a marijuana cigarette, and I freaked out, so I never wanted to use LSD.
Entrance. I think it's a great piece.
One thing I did with this piece is that this collector had many children. His last child was by a Chinese woman artist, and there's a swing. So I put the piece from the point of view of the child. There's also a very old tree in the center of the area, which I didn't want to cut down. Okay, stop. The next image. This is a skateboard pavilion I did for International Garden Year in Stuttgart. It was to be a meeting point, and I think I made a mistake because I saw in Thrasher magazine, a very important magazine that Thurston Moore turned me on to. Because they had hardcore musicians that were featured. So it's too much like a bowl, but I like the idea of a skateboard pavilion, and I wanted the skateboarders to design the bowl themselves. And on top, I have a truncated two-way mirror. Since it was in the center of the city, it's truncated on the top. It's not a real pyramid because all the buildings in the late 80s, had pyramids. In other words, Egyptian power and kind of neo-fascism. So in cutting away the top, when you go up in the air, you can see people going, looking from the side. It's kaleidoscopic. You can see the sun. It's kind of distorted in a very psychedelic way. So by cutting away the top, I made a 1980s corporate building into a kind of a 1960s LSD trip. Next slide. Here's what it looks like. This is my early model, quite primitive. And I guess I'm still using things that have to do with kaleidoscopic images. And now we'll go for the next piece. This is a piece I designed originally from Documenta, 81. It was not realized. It's a triangle, two-way triangle. You can go inside, the other side, the other part of the triangle is a Cibachrome, not back illuminated, just a Cibachrome film, which is an image of the landscape 50 meters in front. So you can look through it, and when you look through it, you can see the skies, the clouds changing, time of day changing, and the seasons changing. I used to do a lot of time delay videos, but this is done without a video. I have to say, Catherine David turned it down because Jeff Wall thought he owned Cibachrome. Of course, Jeff got me into Documenta, but then he made sure this piece wasn't done. Finally, when I had my retrospective in Europe, it was the one piece that was sold to the Surrealist Museum. In Porto, probably the best museum at the time, with the best curator, João Fernandes, and it's still there today in the garden. So I'll show you a short video of the piece. As I said, it changes during the seasons, different seasons. It changes time of day, and they didn't set it where I wanted to. I wanted to have clouds because clouds would shift all the time, every moment. I have to say, my work was very influenced. I showed Dan Flavin in my gallery. I was very influenced by Hudson River School painters, luminous, like Bierstadt, who, by the way, Ed Richet said was his favorite artist. A Swiss artist who did Hudson River School paintings. Thomas Cole, who was British actually, but then he was a teacher of church. And the early panoramas were done by church. The church would go to Norway or Brazil, come back and show panoramas. And the panoramas were the first film. My work is now, I don't have any images of this, but all my great work now is done in Norway. And I think they like it because the light changing. Also, Norway gives a lot of money for education for children and small towns. It's a socialist country which really supports education. In terms of my work for children, Louisiana has a sunken room for children to lie down and look at art above it. So I was very influenced by that. I guess Scandinavia is where most of my work is, although the socialist mayors of France really support my work. The Children's Pavilion was almost done in the year 2000 by Jacques Lang, who was mayor of the city. It was turned down because Jacques Lang, for two reasons. Bureaucracy in French cities is entrenched, and he had to go to Paris to campaign. It was almost done. Jeff Wall version that you see has nothing to do with the work. I asked Jeff to do tondos. He did the tondos, but now you see all the tondos not without my name and without giving me any money in corporate collections. But I'm lucky to have done this piece double exposure. It's still there. Now we'll have questions.
Lots of questions as always, Dan. We'll also open up to you as well. We wanted this to be quite an informal conversation, so please, if anybody at any point would like to jump in, then just raise your hand and we'll bring you a mic. Yeah, it's really amazing to see this fast forward through your work, Dan. And we were talking about this earlier, that 1978 seems to have been a pivotal year from all sorts of different reasons for when you you produced a number of models of alterations to suburban homes. You were just talking about the pavilions that you were doing at that moment. And I had one quite specific question. How have your ideas about pavilions changed since your very earliest experiments?
Well, let me go back to historically what was happening. The best show I ever did, the work I did was an Ambiente by Germain Chaland. I don't have images of it, but it was it was a golden mean rectangle divided in half. The center was thick glass, which was like two-way mirror glass. One side was a mirror, and on the other side was a white wall. And I thought that all Venice Biennale, every country has a work of their best known artists. And actually, it's a showcase for the best-known artists, just like Barcelona Pavilion, I think, was an allegory for the Weimar Republic, showing, by the way, only the furniture of Mies, kind of a luxury good from a country just emerging from the war. So I showed the people themselves looking at each other, and they were in place of the goods. But I thought the piece was a failure because I don't believe in the white cube. So I decided, what if I cut away the white wall on the other side? Oh, also, by the way, people can enter in either the rooms, and they would look at each other, If they looked at the mirror, they could see both themselves looking and other people on the other side looking at them. And in the other room where they looked just through the glass, they would just see an image of themselves. So they're actually asymmetrical, and people could go back and forth. So if I cut away the white wall, I would have what they call architecture. So I had a show 2 years later at Oxford Museum of Modern Art, curated by Mark Francis, in which I produced models. Some of the models were suburban setting, alteration in suburban house. There was another piece called another piece for a clinic, which involved a waiting room. And the doctor's office was downstairs. The front of it, where you enter, there was glass with sliding doors, like Neutra in California architecture. And as you sat there, in the other room was a nurse and receptionist where you pay your money before going downstairs. And there was a mirror. Usually in doctor's offices, you see images of places the doctor has visited, landscape places, Greece or wherever they went to, or you could see very bad abstract art. But here you see yourself in an alienated situation. Another piece was a suburban house with the picture window, and outside was a new device, a video projector, and the video projector showed whatever people were watching inside it in their house. I was very influenced by Venturi, who said people put ornaments. Italians always put Madonnas. Germans have little dwarfs or gnomes outside to show what life is like inside. I think that's a very important piece. It was actually never realized. An alteration in suburban house was quite special. It really comes from Venturi and also Bensenhoff house of Michael Graves. But it can be seen from the street, because usually in the street you see billboards advertising images of the ideal home you could buy. But here as you drive, you could see through the looking at the mirror wall that divides the house, suburban house. You could see the real house. And and it also inflects. You see on the mirror inside the houses across the street. It's very Venturi, it's very much about highway culture also, because you see it in a car as you're shopping for a new house. In terms of how they're changed, also the other models I made were for sculpture pavilions, like two adjacent pavilions, the Argonne piece, and these were like advertisements, models for the pieces actually be realized. In fact, most of them have been realized. I showed the model first, and they're realized. Now the models I do are actually for sale. Nicholas Logsdale, Listing Gallery, said I should do something like Solowit, small little models that can be sold as sculpture. Actually, they almost never sell. Occasionally, they're sold. I've done work like the Yin Yang Pavilion, the Fishpond swimming pool. Never realized before, in projects that will never be realized, and also that they are selling slowly.
Dan, One of the things that's quite a question that I was wondering about is some of your pavilions, for example, in Haus der Kunst in Berlin or in the Hayward Gallery in London, have quite a functional purpose. They're almost like an architectural extension of the building or an implantation of architecture into the building, and whereas other ones have a much more kind of abstract function, of ceremonial function of triggering interactions between people, as you were saying before, reflections and so on. So I was wondering, since you always say that architecture is your hobby, is this which one are you more attracted towards?
Well, first of all, Haus der Kunst doesn't have any work of mine that makes sense. It was bought by Fleck and it's out of context. I don't do very good things inside. My work is site specific, and also in terms of what happens in museums. I think in the 80s, all the museums were in historical parks. That decade was about putting things in parks, where on weekends parents could drive their car, camp out one day, and then see the art the next day. But the next decade, the 90s, was all about education programs for children. So I designed, actually I did a art pavilion in the lobby of the Carnegie for the Carnegie International. It was very important because I don't like institutional critique. I think the most important part of the museum is the lobby, which are romantic pickup places. So there's a heart there, and behind it were Andy Warhol's silver paintings of the love of his life, Elvis. I also designed a CD-ROM computer cartoon, a daycare center to be placed in the lobby. It was actually bought by Castello Rivoli. I don't know if they actually use it. And also I did the children's makeup room, which was never bought by anybody. I think now, and I think my Dia piece was pretty important because it was on the roof. It's a penthouse roof and a slum roof. It's about the city itself. And also there's an old tool shed I turned into a videotheque, where you can see videos of the artists made of music, doing music, performance, dance. Because in the 80s, everything was New Expressionist. Yes, Clemente, David Sally, and it erased what was happening in the decade before. I also used the piece is a cylinder, a 2A mirror cylinder, which is Baroque, surrounded by a 2A mirror cube. I'm contrasting Renaissance perspective with Baroque. And also in this curved 2A mirror Baroque thing, boys on the inside can see themselves as Superman, women who are overweight on the other side can see themselves as thin. And as the clouds change, you had a kind of anamorphosis, which is like Italian Baroque architecture. I used the cube because it reflects the grid of New York. There was an old water tower, which was on top of the roof. I learned from Aldo Rossi. He used that as a symbol of New York, so it's a symbol. I used boardwalk material because I thought Battery Park City would be coming up the Hudson River. I used the rest of the roof. I used rubber material that they use in playgrounds with slides. And the work was basically against this whole idea that artists have, like Leon Gillick or Jorge Pardo, that you have to go back to a utopian idea of the 60s because the 90s was so business oriented. I tried to make it just past, combining the 70s alternative space with an 80s corporate atrium. And all my work is quasi-functional. Not quasi-functional. In fact, one work I did for the Hayward Gallery, which is now taken down, it's called What Are the Sunsets at the Hayward Gallery. It consists of perforated metal, in a kind of labyrinth situation with normal 2A mirror glass. Also, one side is a zigzag, the other side is curved. Elliptical. I wanted the elliptical, and the form is elliptical because I wanted to relate to the elliptical buildings of the financial district, the city. The screens, The screens, computer screens, showed cartoons, classic cartoons for the old people, like Crazy Cat and Mickey Mouse, and also contemporary cartoons like Powerpuff Girls. Children would be entertained, sit down. They could press. I also had Arts Council videos, and Rodney Graham was there looking at it, looking at the piece. You push the screen, and you can go for cartoons if you're 10 years old to watch Tracy Eamon's Why Didn't Become a Dancer. It was multi-use. It was also used when they would have education programs. In fact, a friend of mine from Japan said he was making Liechtensteins with the kids. So it's multi-purpose. It's actually almost architecture. I'm not an architect, but I worked there with an architect, Graham Hayworth, and every detail was important. I made chairs that you could rotate so boys could enjoy themselves. And many of my work is quasi-functional, I think because I was influenced by Russian constructivism. So what you're seeing here in Zegna is basically a landscape piece with funhouse aspects, but my best piece is really quasi-functional.
Sorry, Barbara.
Sorry. I just had a very simple question, because of course, you speak very, very fast, and I'm not sure everybody's getting all the jokes you're throwing, but my impression is that you're using humor quite a bit, and I just wanted to ask you, I mean, what is the role of humor in your work? And I mean, of course, you wrote a very important piece about Sol LeWitt and Sol's humor, but how is this part, how is the fun part, or sort of immediate relationship part of your work here?
Well, I did a pavilion called Yin Yang Pavilion in a dormitory in MIT, Stephen Hall building. It's an attack, a parody on New Age artists like Bill Viola, because all the '90s was New Age. I got this idea of parody. Also, my Star of David Pavilion, which is in Austria. I got this idea of parody in monuments from Klaus Oldenburg. But I'm Jewish. I would never do work like Liebeskind, but the Jewish tradition is stand-up comedy. My favorite artist in New York is Michael Smith, and I think all the great artists use humor. So I guess a great one, a great artist. I think Sigmar Polka was much funnier than Richter. Well. Yes, humor is very important, but I think it comes from teaching. Where if you teach, you have to make jokes up.
We were talking about open air and the landscape and the value of the garden, and maybe you could say a little bit more about this trip that you made in Italy I think in the 70s, from Genoa down the coast towards Rome, Florence, looking at Renaissance gardens and the Baroque, and how this was an influence on your later work, where you operated a sort of inversion, where these spaces of privilege and privacy became a space for democracy, in a way, for public meeting.
I guess we live in democratic societies. Of course, the relationship is many of the museums now are based on old castles. And actually, the more important artists in documenta are in the castles. Old castles are palaces, but also instead of having aristocracy, you have corporate collections and corporate buildings. My children's pavilion, which is, by the way, never realized. Jeff Wall took the Tondos, and they're in every corporate collection. But Jeff, I knew Jeff when he was a Trotskyite, and then he slowly, like all Jewish princesses, became a capitalist. He's cheated me out of lots of money, actually. We did the children's pavilion basically as a kind of fantasy situation. It should have been done for a World's Fair, but Jeff saw the piece I did, the piece I did for Chambre d'Amis. It was a show that was done in Ghent over the summer, and the idea was to have artists use people's houses and gardens and make art there. I did a piece, a children's pavilion there. It was in the garden of an architect, He was switching between his office in the front, which then became his house, and he put his office in the backyard, in the end of the backyard, and it used to be a muddy area where children could play. So I made a small miniature children's pavilion for children to play in it, play in the area. Of course, my client was an architect who had children. Yes, I do believe in clients. I actually always ask when I do a pavilion in a house, I always ask how it's going to be used. Entertaining, people having picnics, or how the children would use it. I think client decides everything in my work. What?
Well, would anybody like to ask Dan anything? Or in the meantime, Dan, maybe you could say a little bit more about this you were just mentioning this work in which you used boardwalk and kind of vernacular materials of highway culture, which is actually right in opposition to a lot of your later work, which was much less referential in kind of architectural and material terms to that sort of culture, and is much more sort of, in a way, purified of its references to pop culture, at least in terms of its kind of architectural details. Whereas others like Robert Venturi, for example, was much more explicit in referencing that kind of work. What's the difference between your approach and his?
He's an architect. I'm an artist. But I always do hybrids. My first work was his magazine page pieces 2 years before Kossuth, and was a hybrid between art magazine pages, essays, magazines, and just things for magazines. I've always done hybrids. But now I collaborated recently on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum. I've done a piece with the greatest living landscape architect, Gunter Voigt. If you've probably been to the Tate Modern, you've seen his work in the entrance area, the birch trees. I also decided to use AstroTurf, very evolved AstroTurf. And everything I do, I depend really on my two architects. One of them was Chris Gimpa, who did the piece in Zegna, or Mark Schupos, who does all my work, German architect, does all my work in Scandinavia. And detailing is very important. The Gia Foundation, the detailing was quite bad. It was criticized by a lot of people, like John Knight and other people. Michael Lasher, who is my closest friend and who I did a lot of things with, didn't like the fact that I was not deconstructing the museum. In fact, I was trying to change the use of the museum. It was making a populous space, a cafe, and it was also that piece, the Dia piece was an attack on Heiner Friedrich. Flavin tried to get me and Michael Lasher into Dia. I refused. I think the Dia is all about people like James Turrell. It's kind of new age German mysticism, where the artist is like a Valhalla, produces almost no work because he's a genius. My work is populist. And the new piece in the Met is for all you Europeans who want to see the treetops of Central Park and the building, the skyscraper buildings. It's also a place where you could lie down like a Seurat. I think it combines Seurat and Bruce Nauman. Yes, I didn't study art, but now I go to museums and I just love art, paintings. In fact, I have most of my pavilions actually come from the paintings of Robert Mangold. You might notice the ellipses and the gentle curve. It's very Mangold-like. Maybe I've spoken too much, so there are no questions.
Domande?
No questions?
One more.
Okay.
I was wondering, because I've never really heard you speak about the kind of the way that sort of an inversion has occurred. Since the 1970s, the home was really an extremely private sphere. It was a sphere that kind of represented, it was a kind of a proxy of the family as the kind of the nuclear family as the constituent element of society, an extremely kind of very simple kind of inversion between public and private. And of course now, in a way, 30 years later, an inversion has occurred to some extent where the home has actually become a much more public space, largely due to social media. There's like a proliferation.
Magazine.
and Domus magazine, exactly. So I was wondering what your thoughts are, since you were really working on these ideas already in the 70s and 80s about the kind of the home as a stage, the home as something that is not sealed from outside space. Was this a prefiguration of what would later come in terms of the home becoming a sort of a public stage for one's self-representation?
That was Venturi's idea, pretty much. But I will say, in terms of home, even though I grew up in upper middle class, my father was a chemist and my mother education psychologist. After the war, we had no money. And we stayed in a kind of army barracks. I grew up in an army barracks. So as Jewish person, Jewish people are very uptight. I was in love with upper lower class Italian Americans. All my photographs are Italian Americans who live in Brooklyn or Queens, getting to New Jersey or Staten Island and getting a plastic swimming pool. I really think T.J. Clark is very important. He said the revolutionary class was a petit bourgeois. I actually believe that. Maybe old-fashioned Marxists don't understand that. They think workers rule everything. No, I think the revolutionary class is a petit bourgeois. Venturi comes from an Italian-American family, working class, but he went to Quaker schools. And of course, he learned a lot from mannerism. He actually went to Italy and researched mannerism. He also loved Ed Ruscha in Oldenburg, and also a very kind, sweet man who I met when I met him. Very shy. The opposite. His office is actually, he likes antiques. So his office is in a tiny little suburb of Philadelphia, a factory building, and he has one floor. And actually downstairs on the show window, he shows the public all the projects they're working on. I think Europeans misunderstand Venturi. The work, just because he uses flags, that comes from Jasper Johns. He's not patriotic, but he really relates to his background, which was upwardly mobile, lower class Italian Americans. But I think what's happening now is everybody lives in condominiums. There's the very rich and the very poor, and my clients tend to be more rich, but I don't have many clients actually. Actually, it's very hard for me to even sell work. The work was mostly done for temporary situations like Documenta, Munster, Venice Biennale, but I haven't been invited to them for 15 years. So this is a great opportunity to do a piece here. It's actually because of Massimo Manini and Barbara. I can't pronounce your last name, Casanova. It's kind of a miracle that things are happening for me. The piece on the roof was actually engineered by the assistant curator, Ian Altivar, and the finances are very tricky. For that piece was over budget, the one on the Met roof. So because Gina Wagstaff is a chief painter, painting sculpture, chief curator of the Met, she's English, so she had a connection with Listening Gallery. Alex Lonsdale put in money. Of course, that we produced the triangular circular cutouts. It was I'm not going to get any money for this, but he was able to sell the work to the Met, and I think we still have some financial problems. Bureaucracy of the Met was unbelievable, and Gunter Voigt's also big landscape business was unbelievable. But it's always the assistant curator who makes these things work.
Can I just move in another direction? I have a very simple question. Very often when talking about your works, especially the pavilions, is always the visual side that seems to be so important.
The what?
Visual. The reflections and how you see things change and move, but as a large part of your work has also been very involved with music, there is a sound element. Whenever you enter a space, and I've experienced this with the mirror, I'm sorry, two-way mirror, Hedge Arabesque. By being there alone, you go up in the mountain and suddenly you start hearing, the landscape around you. So are they also,
No,
devices for...
I agree, but interestingly enough, I can't hear, even though I like rock music, I can't hear because someone put a firecracker in a small Chinese-American restaurant, and instead of destroying the eardrum, it destroyed the inner ear. Also, my sight isn't very good because I have diabetes, but Barbara also has hearing problems. But I agree, the Dia Foundation is acoustically pretty amazing. The only other thing I want to mention is my work is human scale. It's never it's never monumental. I did one monumental thing for a corporation in Munich, and it's a terrible piece. I can't work on these monumental scales. But the artists now, I did early video pieces which were analog. I didn't have the money to do big spectacles, but these artists like Pierre He, Douglas Gordon, they've oversimplified a lot of my work. Or listen, it's monumental because museums want monumental spectacles. My work does have an entertainment value, but it's not Johnny Spectacle. Although I have to say, I like the circus paintings of Georges Seurat. People are looking at the performers, and they're looking at each other, and they're being looked at by other people. And Peter Fischley said in Le Grand Joute, people are lying down on the grass, and he knows they're working class because their clothes are very stiff. So I've come to absolutely love Seurat. He died young, but there are no books about him as an artist who died young, like Van Gogh. Although I also love Van Gogh. Very good questions. Both of you guys. Nobody from the audience, but
I think this morning you were mentioning Paola Nicolin, who was responsible for bringing you back to writing here in Milan. So maybe Paola has a question for Dan.
I'm not sure if, can you hear me? So my question, of course, must deal with writings, because probably is the very first way I be in touch with Dan Graham. So I think writing is a pretty much important part of your practice, and you have been writing about architecture, about many other artists, about the relationship between art and architecture, and so. I think we are approaching a very important biennial in architecture, where the dialogue between art and architecture should be, let's say, a kind of visionary one. So I know that you will be probably not very, agree with this idea. So my question is, writing for you means approaching art and architecture in which sense?
I think everybody's doing architecture. Artists are doing architecture without understanding it, and architects are doing art. I started doing the architecture models because I saw a show in the Castelli Gallery of architecture models. So I thought, why shouldn't artists do architecture models? My work was kind of copied by Thomas Schutte, copied by Julian Opie, and now Eliasson combines Smithson, Dan Graham with 100 architects who don't really know much about architecture. But I guess his best work was the New Age pieces, the small early pieces. When people get big, they want to do everything. I only deal with very small galleries because big galleries can't sell my work. In fact, all the shows have been failures. I have one great deal. Well, first of all, Massimo Manini thinks he's an artist-architect. He wants to build my pieces. We also do architecture tours. We saw it in Bolzano, a Scarpa house. I kind of turned him onto architecture. And my best dealer actually is Nikolai Waldner in Copenhagen. His wife is an architect. He owns an Arjen Jacobsen house. It's interesting because Denmark was very important. You know that Joe Colombo was on a hippie commune done by Oscar Jorn. outside of Milano, and I think Denmark also doesn't have a right-wing government. It's centrist, run by a woman. But at the moment, Norway is the most interesting place for my work. You never know who your clients are going to be. I haven't seen a lot of my work because it's in very remote areas. I have a beautiful piece in Estremadura that I've never seen that I've lost a lot of money on. And I haven't seen pieces in Norway that I've done, they're too remote. But in terms of the fashion of art and architecture, I think it's kind of ridiculous. And also this celebration of Cedric Price. Cedric Price never built much architecture. I turned Hans-Holger Ubers onto his work. He was a teacher of Rem Koolhaas. I think what Rem has done is combine Super Studio and Cedric Price without the politics. So I don't really trust I'm in that show, but I put a piece in for 1989 called Peace, which is all these different sexual positions for different people with different astrological signs. Vito Conci took a lot from it. It's called Baseball Peace. But I refuse to go see the show because I think it's probably terrible. And also, I don't like where you talk with Rem Koolhaas for about 2 minutes at most. Every time I've done these things, like in Sardinia, I kind of critique Rem, but I'm a little too old and get very sick in the summer to do it again. Also, I have to say, in terms of Triennale, I saw actually some years ago the Dantean models of Tirani. I know that James Turrell copied Dantean. I have the books to prove it in my library. I don't know why people like Turrell. His work is not very good. I like Doug Wheeler, and Michael Asher was amazing. I published the first book on Michael Asher, Heiser, at Nova Scotia College of Art. Great loss when he died. And I wrote the first article about Mata Clark. I kind of discovered him. And Mata Clark, I think, was a South American artist and architect. He learned a lot from Lino Barbardi. In New York, he was friends with Juan Downing, who was an architect as well as an artist. And Oda Sika started doing architecture models. Mata Clark's work is not formalistic, it's agitprop. Very misunderstood. He also learned a lot from the Benseroff House, as I did for Alteration in Suburban House, where Michael Grace cut away an existing house to show the structure inside. That's amazing work. It's not documented in the books that well, but it was amazing work. The Benseroff House, owned by a Venezuelan collector outside of Princeton. It's a good question because, yes, I'm not so sure about these kind of exhibitions about art and architecture. I'm certainly not going to be included in them. People don't even know I did work in that area. Today it's Eliasson, Leon Gillick, and Thomas Damon. People have forgotten I even worked in that area. But for a while, Arbitrari and Domus would publish my writings. Well, I'm afraid that's not possible anymore. Although I did do an article on John Lautner. Lautner was deeply influenced by Nervi. And that's going to be in the architecture newsletter of Bill Mencken. But I guess that's not distributed very widely. Yes, I guess as an architecture tourist, I love architecture.
I sometimes think about founding a new architecture magazine just so that you can write for it, Dan. I think it would be...
I think you have to get a lot of corporate advertising. And that's pretty hard to do.
True.
Well, your spirit's in the right place. Also, the thing about Joseph I love is his humor. When he was at Storefront, some of the shows were incredibly humorous.
Dan was the only one who understood them, so but as long as
it
would...
I brought friends in and they loved the shows.
Well, friends of friends.
I think you were a great success, actually, at Storefront. We're sorry you left.
Yeah, well, we had great neighbors. So.
But it's always they couldn't raise. It's hard to raise money for Storefront. But you were recruited. You were recruited by Sarah Herder, I think. Now she's at the Graham Foundation. I guess everybody goes on to bigger and better things.
Do you go to Chicago very much?
No, I don't like the city. There's no interest in my work there, and I don't think it's a good architecture city. All the great Frank Lloyd Wrights and Sullivans are actually in Buffalo, and Frank Lloyd Wright's best building, the S.C. Johnson building, is in Racine, Wisconsin. I once took an architecture tour with my architect and his girlfriend. All the great work is in, outside of being in Philadelphia, is all in the Midwest. Columbus, Indiana, a very tiny city, has 3 major Saarinens, a major Venturi. Saarinen was actually from Michigan. It's all in the Midwest. And New York often has nothing. We have a beautiful Nervi, which is in the bus station, George Washington bus station, and we have a beautiful new Maki. Maki is rarely featured. People always go for Tsujima, who's a very bad architect, or Ando for a while. But there's some great. I love Izuku Hasegawa, Maki, and I love Atelier Bow-Wow, who I discovered. These are non-corporate architects. They're often not featured in magazines like Domus. But of course, Hans has now commissioned Atelier Bow-Wow to do a piece. But of course, they also did 2 things in Sao Paulo Biennale. And if you ever go to Sao Paulo, there's a great architect, a woman architect, Lina Barbardi, but even greater, Artegas. South America produced the greatest artists, Alicia Clark and Oda Sika, and also the greatest architects. But slowly, Europe is understanding. All these people migrated to New York, by the way, the South American artists. They went to Europe, to Paris, Soto and the kinetic artists. But Europeans don't really have much experience with South American art or architecture.
Anna, do you have any questions for Dan?
Well, I see it's almost a full house. Oh, you have a question?
I'd like to ask you a little bit about when you came to the foundation, the Ratti Foundation. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
Yes. What was that experience for you, the Ratti Foundation?
My impression was it was a difficult site. It was a difficult site. People were worried that it would be a lot of rain from the Alps. I found one site, but I understand. I was just there for half a day. I understand that Chris Kimpa and the other people in the team found a great site. So I just began the process. There was a number of works I had in my notebooks that they suggested. Massimo didn't like any of them, but in the end, I prevailed. The one I liked was done, and I had a wonderful time actually staying at a hotel that was pretty rustic, and it was a family hotel. I was actually just came for one day. Because I had to go back. I was doing something in Margate, a talk in Margate, in Chipperfield Building, and it was just a lecture, and I almost never get to England because I have no friends and there's no interest in my work. All my friends are English, but I never go there because no museum in England owns a work of mine. So just to be able to go to England very briefly was very important. But I took the train. I was just here one day here. I took the train directly to London and went to Margate. Everything is very brief for me. One of the reasons I wanted to come here was because my wife, Mika Magoro, loves architecture, and I wanted to show her the Casa Rustica. But in previous trips, we've gone to Como and we've seen other Tirani. I'm in Aries like Barbara. Tirani was an idealistic Aries. Also Mies, I almost had the same birthday as Mies. We Aries are kind of idealistic, but we have big temper tantrums. Look at Khrushchev. I can't believe this project happened because in the beginning, Massimo wanted to do the architecture himself to save money, but I convinced him it would be cheaper and quicker if we used my Belgian architect, and it happened. It's finished, and Barbara says it's a great piece. I haven't seen it yet.
Everybody's seen it, says it's a great piece. Any other question? Altre domande? Oh, we have one.
Ecco, io vorrei sapere
I would like to know, after all you have told us, you have bonding with Europe and you are very loved in Europe, maybe more than in the USA. And I would like to tell us where does this link to the European culture come from?
Your work is much loved in Europe, sometimes even more in Europe than in the US, and you're very knowledgeable when it comes to European culture, architecture, etc. Is there anything you'd like to say about this relationship and how?
Oh, yes, very easy. I'm Jewish, and my best friend in New York was a fun-loving guy called Caspar Koenig. Caspar got me to Europe, to Germany. Jews are loved in Germany. But I also learned a lot from Japan. I had a great dealer, Keiko Shimada. And also I had made a friend the first time I went to Japan, 78. I met a young student, and I taught her about architecture. We did tours to see Hasegawa and other great Japanese architects. Venturi, when he went to Japan, he gave a lecture. When he came back to New York, he said, learning from Japan. And I think all people like who do good work, I guess my work is pretty good, we learn from other cultures. The most difficult place is Paris. French are cheap. They never pay. When my work falls apart, they big lawsuits against everybody. It's not an easy country, but actually I was very helped by an alternative space called Le Consortium. They promoted my work. They're in Dijon. They promoted my work, and actually, 40% of my collectors are doctors. My work was discovered actually by Herman Dellette, a radiologist. He saw my Side Effects Common Drugs piece, or early magazine page piece, John Gibson Gallery, brought it back to Belgium, and his advisor was actually Marcel Broadhouse, who loved my work. I showed it with a great gallery, MTL Gallery, and of course without Belgium I wouldn't have a career. The best collectors are there, Italy, I had lots of fun in Italy. I showed with 20 galleries, nothing sold, and they sold all the work. Massimo was the only dealer who actually was honest, but I had an enormous amount of fun. I also met some great artists. In the end of his life, I traded with Fabro, but it was the 60s, and of course everybody was into drugs and not paying. Franklin Cicelli never paid me. He always said dopa domani. Actually, I'm experiencing more about art in Italy because I don't know so much about it. Because my wife Monica Magoro is an expert on Caravaggio, but I prefer Pontormo. So I'm now in my old age discovering things in museums.
There's a Pontormo.
You should go and see the exhibition in Florence on Pontormo.
I have no time.
Wow, it's a shame.
No, I've seen. Look, the best Pontormo is actually in the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna.
Not in Santa Felicita, no. Never mind.
I like his colors. And you know who loved mannerism? Smithson. You know, Smithson was gay, so he loved all the kind of the manners. I didn't understand Baroque, but I think I think my work has become Baroque a little bit. Although it was a terrible period, especially in Salzburg.
especially in Salzburg. Any more questions? Otherwise, penso che possiamo
Io credo che a questa sera siano fischiate le orecchie a un sacco di persone non presenti in questa sala, morti, non morti, di tutto. Io comunque ringrazio voi per la partecipazione, per l'incontro con questo artista così impegnativo, ma d'altronde ha una tale caratura intellettuale che è veramente incredibile. Ringrazio Barbara, Joseph, Dani in primis, ma poi c'è una persona in particolare che vorrei ringraziare, che è rappresentata qui dalle sue figlie, Francesca e Alessandra, perché senza Massimo Menini questo progetto non si sarebbe potuto fare, per cui mi dispiace molto che lui per motivi personali non possa essere qua, ma è veramente stato straordinario il suo appoggio, il fatto che abbia creato proprio da filtro tra noi e lui e tutto. E poi non da ultimo vorrei ringraziare la Triennale per aver ospitato questo incontro. Grazie mille.
Aggiungo un piccolo ringraziamento per la nostra traduttrice, che penso sia stata una performer questa sera. Grazie.
Francesca. So, grazie milioni, and thank you for coming.